For 200 years, the world called it peace, the Pax Romana. From Britain to the sands of Arabia, Roman roads and laws stitched together a vast, breathing empire. To those who lived beneath its marble shadows, it felt eternal. This was the dream of Augustus, an architecture of order that outlived the men who designed it. The secret of Roman stability was machinery. Roads, law codes, and tax systems functioned with the precision of a legion. The aqueducts were the veins of the city, bringing life from the mountains. Engineering was the highest form of governance. Leadership was building systems that could carry the weight of generations. Precision was their religion. Rome was guarded by giants. Emperors like Trajan, Hadrian, and Marcus Aurelius treated power as a stewardship, not a prize. Philosophers in armor, guardians of a world that seemed unbreakable. They expanded and fortified the borders, creating a world where a citizen could walk from Spain to Syria and never leave the protection of the law. But beneath the marble, the cracks were widening. The economy strained under the weight of endless fronts. Plague stalked the crowded cities. The legions were loyal, but increasingly to gold and generals rather than the idea of Rome. The structure was still standing, but the foundation had begun to rot. The shadow was moving inward. Then came the madness. Caligula turned the palace into a theater of cruelty. Nero wanted to be an artist while the city burned. Under their rule, the empire learned that one man's vanity could drown an entire world in fear. Leadership without restraint becomes spectacle. The empire was stable, its mind was fracturing. The warning signs were ignored for cheers. Commodus, the gladiator emperor, chose the arena over the forum. He fought for cheers while the bureaucracy rotted. When the ruler forgets he is a steward, the state becomes a toy. The lion of Rome was being hollowed out from the inside. Strength had become a mask, and the mask was beginning to slip. Power was now a performance. Spectacle is an expensive drug. To buy loyalty, you must have more gold and more fear. The Praetorian Guard learned the secret. Emperors are replaceable. Loyalty went to the highest bidder. The dagger became the true seat of power. Bread and circuses kept the masses quiet, but the price was the soul of the state. Spartacus had shown what happens when those at the bottom break their chains. His memory remained, a ghost in the empire's conscience. The iron band of the borders stretched to the edge of the world, but an empire that must be defended everywhere is always one crisis from death. Stability had become a full-time, grinding war. Hooves pounded from the Rhine to the sands of Syria. In Judea, the empire learned that you can conquer land, but not spirit. The destruction of the temple was a warning engraved in stone. Suppression by force only sows the seeds of future revolt. Leadership without empathy is merely a temporary occupation. The stones remember what men forget. Every citizen lived between two realities, the comfort of the law and the terror of the throne. One day a builder, the next a butcher. The same aqueduct that brought life could also be the path of an army marching to crush a dream. The empire was a duality of light and profound darkness. Order was balanced on a razor's edge. The architecture of peace was designed to survive mediocre men. But no system survives when its leaders forget why it was built. Virtue is the only mortar that holds the blocks of empire together. Without integrity, the weight becomes too heavy. The mortar was drying. The stones were ready to fall. From a distance, the empire still looked like a sunrise. The roads were full, the markets pulsed, but the sun had reached its zenith. The long shadow began. On the horizon, the storm was forming. Debt, disease, and disillusionment within. Barbarians waiting without. The machine was working, but it was overheating. The peak was the beginning of the end. Rome at its height is a warning, not just a wonder. It teaches us that the moment of greatest stability can hide the deepest cracks. Powerful and profoundly fragile, a nation can be both at the same time. The zenith is the place where the only way forward is down. The rot was complete, even if the marble was still white. Does it look familiar? Wealth gaps, spectacle over substance, leaders chosen for charisma over character. The stones are talking. They tell us that systems are only as strong as the souls within them. If we only see the past, we are doomed to repeat it. The mirror of Rome is the mirror of us. We must listen. In part 4, we walk into the storm. The crisis of the 3rd century. Economic collapse, the plague, the final dissolution. The empire will stagger and fall, but the lessons remain. This is the story of how power is gained, used, and eventually lost. Rome is not finished with us yet. The final fire is coming. Stay tuned. Trajan pushed the borders to their limit, carving victories in stone. But Hadrian understood the limit. He built walls not to expand, but to hold. This was the shift from offensive to defensive, the first admission that the energy of the rise was spent. The band of iron was now a cage. Expansion had ended. Trade was the silent glue. The denarius was the global currency, but prosperity dulls the edge of discipline. Citizens who once fought for the state now paid others to do it. The burden of duty was replaced by the comfort of wealth, a lesson in the erosion of the civic spirit that once made Rome invincible. They built for immortality, bridges that stood for millennia, arches that defied the sky. But stone is easier to maintain than character. The architecture remained, but the soul was departing. Leadership is the only force that keeps monuments from becoming tombs. We must build character, not just stone. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself in the middle of a plague and a war. He knew the end was coming. He tried to steer the ship by the light of reason, but he was alone in a storm of internal decay. The inner citadel was the last line of defense. When he died, the golden age died with him. The sun would destroy the work. The external pressure was rising. Barbarian tides were now an existential threat. The legions were overstretched, the treasury empty, and the leadership insane. The vultures were circling. The warning signs were reality. The fall was no longer a possibility. It was an inevitability. The clock was ticking. We measure the distance between then and now, but the map is the same. Power is a stewardship. We hold it for a moment. Rome held it for 1,000 years. What did they build? And what are we building? The Appian Way is empty, but the lessons are crowded with truth. Listen to the stones. They speak. The zenith is over. The rod is complete. The fire is coming. In our final 15-minute segment, we will witness the end of an era, the fall of Rome and why it still matters today. The journey concludes next. Prepare for the impact. No part mentioned. Perfect join ready. The story continues. After the stability of Augustus came the fire of Trajan, the Optimus Princeps, the best of emperors. He pushed the Roman eagle to its absolute limit, from the mountains of Dacia to the shores of the Persian Gulf. Leadership was now an offensive weapon, proving that an empire that stops growing is an empire that begins to die. But every mile of expansion added a pound of pressure to the center. Trajan's column still stands as a testament to this logistical and military genius. It wasn't just about conquest. It was about the total integration of the frontier into the Roman mind. But Trajan's peak was also a warning. He had reached the edge of the world, and there was nowhere left to go but back. The energy of the rise was reaching its saturation point. Hadrian saw the warning signs. He was the architect of consolidation. He built walls, not just Hadrian's wall in Britain, but walls of law and culture, to hold what had been won. He understood that the greatest leadership challenge is not seizing power, but maintaining it. He spent his reign traveling, checking the mortar of the empire, ensuring the stones were still joined. He rebuilt the Pantheon, a temple to all the gods, with a dome that defied the laws of gravity. It was a physical manifestation of Roman unity, diverse, grand, and held together by mathematical precision. But the light shining through the oculus was also a spotlight on the internal tensions. The unity was a performance, and the performers were growing tired. Then came the invisible enemy, the Antonine Plague. It didn't care for legions or walls. It followed the trade routes, hitching a ride on the very prosperity the empire had worked so hard to build. Millions died. The economy shuddered. For the first time, the Roman world looked at the sky and saw not an eternal sunrise, but an approaching darkness. The plague was the first true systems failure. The death toll shattered the tax base and decimated the army. Leadership was forced into a desperate defensive crouch. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king, found himself ruling a graveyard. His meditations were written in the mud of the frontier, a manual for leading when there is no hope. This is the lesson of the inner citadel. Character is the only thing the plague cannot touch. The Roman soldier was no longer a conqueror. He was a survivor. Weary eyes stared into campfires along the Danube, waiting for an enemy that never stopped coming. The burden of the state had become an agonizing weight. The citizens were becoming subjects, and the subjects were becoming ghosts. The Zenith was passing into the long shadow of the rot. Knowledge began to burn. The libraries of the mind were being replaced by the fortresses of the body. When a society prioritizes survival over vision, it has already lost its future. The burning scrolls were the funeral pyre of the Golden Age. The son of Marcus Aurelius, Commodus, would soon light the final match. The vultures were no longer circling. They were landing. The warning signs had become the daily news. The empire was powerful, profoundly fragile, and increasingly insane. As we close this 15-minute exploration of the Zenith, look at the stones one last time. They are the map of where we are headed. In the final segment, the fire arrives. Stay vigilant.